Hey there everybody, and welcome to part 8 of the upbge tutorial series where I teach you how to make video games using the Blender game engine. So, the last two episodes, what we've been doing is making coins that are collectible, and we've made it collect in a way that's kind of very pleasing, except there's a glaring issue, and let's talk about what that issue is and how to solve it. The issue is when we run our game, you can see we have our character and we can collect coins and it's working. But there's no way for us to know how many coins we've collected. There's no coin counter. Now, you might think that it's very easy to add a counter, but it's not. Because what we need to do is we need to add a text object, which in Blender, it's not really easy to change what the text is every time. So we want the text to say 2 coins and 3 coins. It's kind of difficult. So what we're going to do to fix this is we're actually going to use geometry nodes, which is compatible with the Blender game engine. One thing I want to say about this is we are using version 0.3 because that is the most non-buggy version, which means it's running on Blender 3.0, which means some of the geometry nodes that have been in 3.5 are not here. Okay, so just a bit of a caveat with that. With that being said, let's make a coin counter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an object. Let's say it's a sphere, and this is going to be our coin counter. Now, we don't care that it's a sphere because we're going to be changing it in geometry nodes. So in geometry nodes, we are going to add a geonodes group. We're going to delete the group input and replace it with text. And the reason, and we're going to use strings to curve to do that, the reason that we're doing this in geometry nodes is this string input is now customizable. So I can hit A, and now we have the letter A. Let me make that a bit bigger, but we could switch that to B, to C, or more importantly to numbers like 1, 2, and 3. To make this actually visible, we are going to fill in the curve, and then it's really just a matter of what string we put in here. So how do we access this geometry node setting from the Blender game engine? Well, let me show you. So here is our object. I'm going to name it. I'm going to call it coin counter. We haven't really been doing a good job with naming. I can only blame myself there. With this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new network. So now this object is going to be referencing the coin counter network where we're going to basically update the geometry nodes. So in this network, we're going to be using a new node called nodes geometry set node input value. What this does is it sets a value in geometry nodes, which is why it said geometry before. So in the set input value, we say which geometry nodes, it's our first one, referencing the strings to curve node. So basically what this is doing is it's going to reference every node in this network, being strings to curve, fill curve, and output. Okay, and you can see these are options here. So with strings to curve, we have the string, we have the size, the character spacing. It's basically looking input per input of the strings to curve node. So in theory, what we should be able to do is we are modifying the string, and I can set it to a value of, let's actually just add a external string node. So I'm going to connect that here, and let's say our string is ABC. Now, if we run this, we expect this to be ABC. Of course, it's not going to be, and we'll talk about why in a second. But you can see, I guess it's a little hard to see because of the lighting. So let me just kind of move this light above. So you can see we have the number 3, but it's not ABC, which is what we said it is. Now, the reason for this is, yes, we made the network, but it's not being applied, right? So we got to always go to dashboard and apply to selected. So now this is a game property of our object. Oh, we got to make sure, by the way, we got to make sure to do that while we're selecting the correct object. Apply to selected. And we now expect this to work, but I think there might be another issue. So let's see. We run this and it's still set to 3. What's going on here? Well, what's going on is we're saying only change the string to this under a certain condition. And we haven't said what that condition is. So let's try doing on init, which again is on initialization when the game starts. So I'm hitting P, and now all of a sudden you can see it's ABC. So basically what happens is we start the game, it initializes, and then it runs this code basically. So if I set this to the number 5, you can now see it's updating to 5. So really the rest of this is setting this input, the string input, to update depending on how many coins we collect. Now an issue is when we're counting how many coins we have, that is like an integer. In other words, it's a number. And we need to display that as a string, a piece of text, which means there's a difference between the number 3 and the string 3. We need to convert numbers into strings, okay? And there's actually no way to do that in the Blender game engine. So we got to get creative. To do this, I'm going to go back to geometry nodes, and instead of just putting in a string, which is what we're going to modify, we're going to use the value to string. So we're going to outsource this to geometry nodes to do our conversion. So I'm going to connect that here. And then basically whatever I put here is going to be converted into a string. So now I want to change the value to string, changing the value to, let's say, 5. And what should happen is now it's set to 5, okay? Which looks like nothing changed, but this is subtle because now we can actually change this number over time. And this might not be the best demo, but let me see if I can show you that this updates. By the way, I'm going to save this. Total elapsed time. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that is not the way. What we need to do is we need to update this in a way that's relevant to the coins. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a property, which I don't think we've talked about, to this. And that property is going to say how many coins we have. So to do that, I'm going to add a game property to our text object. And I'm going to call this counter. So now we have a counter property. It's set to 0, initialized to 0 by default. And now we can actually call that property. So I'm going to do get property, connect that here, of the object counter. So basically, we're looking at this node that is referencing the object that's in here, the text object, and it's pulling the property counter. So by default, it should be set to 0 when we play the game. Yep. And then when we set the property to 2, you can see now it's set to 2, okay? So basically the key insight here is whatever this property is, it's going to show that in text using the value to string. But the reason I did this as a property is now we can go into the coin network and have it like add 1 every time we collect a coin. So now going to the coin network, remember we have all these like conditionals and all that. What we care about is we have this check distance, which again is looking at the coin position and our character Q position. And if it's within some threshold, it's going to do all kinds of stuff. And after it moves and then removes the object, what we want to do is we want to increase the counter by 1. So again, when this move operation is complete, when it's moved to the cube, it's going to delete the object, and we now want to modify a property. So I'm going to connect that right here. I'm going to set this to addition because we want to add something to the property. This is going to be in reference to our counter object, which is the one that has the property. Set to counter, and I'm going to add 1. So the way I want you to think about this is anytime this is valid, anytime this conditional is done, once the coin has come to our character, it's going to first of all delete the object, and second of all increment or add 1 to the property, which is what is being referenced in this set node input. So in theory, it's set to 0, and now, well, it seems to not be updating. So let's figure out what the issue there is. Okay, so I looked through the nodes to try to find the issue, and honestly, it was a bit subtle. I didn't know what the issue was until I was really scanning our nodes, and it's actually something we did in the beginning of the tutorial. So if you figured out what the issue is, kudos to you, because it was not obvious to me. Basically, this should be working, except when we go to our coin counter. Yes, it is referencing this property, but it's only doing that on initialization. In other words, right after the game is started, it's not going to update it again. So what we need to do is we need to say, do this every single frame on update. So now we're referencing this operation on every single update, meaning that now when I play the game, you can see all of a sudden our coin counter works. And the nice thing about this is it's going to work with an arbitrary number of coins, okay? And we can also do something fancy here, where like maybe what we can do is, yes, we're collecting coins, but let's say our character kind of dies and it gets respawned. Maybe what we should do is we should have the counter go back to 0, as in you lost all your points. So let's try to do that. So how do we know that the character is respawned? Well, that's going to be in the character node network. So I'm going to go to character, and remember, we have a whole mess here, but remember we have these nodes from before where we're checking if the position is under some value. So if the position's under -2, implying that it's fallen off the plane. If that's the case, then yeah, we're turning off dynamics, enabling dynamics, yada, yada. But another thing we can do is we can set the property back to 0. So I'm going to connect this here. So I'm just adding a node in between. So the moment this happens, it's going to respawn it and then change the property of the coin counter, of the counter property, and I'm going to change the string to 0, I believe. Or should this be a float? Set this to 0. Let's see. So we are now collecting coins, it's working, and I fall off the thing. No, that is not the way. So again, I had to track down the issue for this one, and it was actually very, very subtle in this case, because our logic is correct. Like, there's no reason this shouldn't be working. We're collecting coins, the counter goes up, and when we respawn, it should be using the set property node, but it seems not to. It turns out whenever we're kind of like updating a property or something like that, sometimes it's not being executed unless we kind of reload it. So what I found is for our character, I'm going to delete this game property of using the character network. I'm going to apply to selected. So basically I got rid of it and put it back in. But you're going to see after having done that, we're collecting coins, and then I jump off and it's set back to 0. And then we can continue collecting coins. So I don't really know what that's about. I don't know if that's intentional or a bug or whatever. But just so you know, that seems to be how it's working at the moment. So sometimes you need a reload, even though your logic is correct. So we now have a coin counter, and that's what we were trying to do. So maybe in the next part, what we can do is maybe move the coin counter to be in a certain part of the screen. Maybe something we could do. I'm not sure yet. We'll figure it out. So I'll see you in the next part. Bye.